In 1986, I took a backpack and headed off to the People's Republic of China. I was 21 years old. I hadn't been much of anywhere. But I wanted to be a writer, a great writer. And to do this, I believed you had to have great adventures like Byron or Ernest Hemingway. I imagined I'd travel the world, then sit at my desk, a bolt of inspiration would strike, and all the stories I'd collected would come pouring out of me into great books. The People's Republic of China had been open to independent travelers for about 10 minutes. Going there was the equivalent of backpacking through North Korea today. I spoke no Mandarin, knew little about Asia, but I thought, hey, I'm young and educated and American. How hard could this be? Well, I found out. When I arrived in China, I was in a totalitarian state, stripped of everything familiar. I got sick and frightened, and I got into so much trouble I almost didn't make it out of the country. The only stories I ended up inventing were the ones I told the Chinese military police to keep them from incarcerating me and a friend. By the time I finally made it back to New York, I was traumatized and mute. I couldn't write about anything at all. Today, I'm the author of 4 books. They've been on bestseller lists, translated into a dozen languages, but I'm here to tell you, everything I'd once believed about writing is absolutely wrong. It turns out I was as naive about what it takes to write as I was about traveling to China. And this is important because there is an insidious myth about the creative process that stands to undermine not just writers, but anybody involved in any innovative work at all, whether it's scientific research or medicine or art. This is the myth of the lightning bolt, of eureka, of divine inspiration. We all see this myth in popular culture all the time. I'm sure some of you have watched Dr. House, as the television show is called here. Every episode, Hugh Laurie has an epiphany and suddenly discovers the cure for mysterious illness. Now, these instant breakthroughs make for terrific television, and they're seductive. Because I think we all wish that brilliance will select us, come to us, deliver us, because this is proof that we're uniquely gifted and chosen. Also, let's face it, lightning bolts make everything seem really, really easy. All we have to do is wait for them to strike, and ta-da, we're a genius. But as a writer, I have to tell you, there is no lightning bolt. I once heard an interview with the Rolling Stones guitarist Keith Richards, in which he recounted how he came up with the band's greatest hit, Satisfaction. He was asleep with his guitar, he said, when he actually dreamt the notes. He woke up, recorded them on a tape player he kept at the side of his bed, then went back to sleep. He didn't even know what he had until the next morning. The greatest riff of the song voted the #1 rock and roll song of all time came to Keith Richards in a dream. This seems like the ultimate lightning bolt, a great musical eureka moment. But here's the critical detail. Richards said that when the notes came to him, he was asleep with his guitar. Think about that. Think about how obsessed, and okay, maybe stoned, you have to be to take your guitar to bed with you. Richards didn't just party like a rock star, he worked like one. He was playing all day and all night for years, improvising, trying things out. And he kept a tape recorder on his nightstand because he never knew when something would strike. So this song wasn't simply a bolt of brilliance out of the blue, but the fruition of an insane amount of obsession and practice. Tellingly, you know what else Richards recorded that night? 40 minutes of snoring. That's a ratio of 2,400 seconds of snore to about 12 seconds of music. So his breakthrough was simply one moment in a long string of trial and error. It's relentless hard work that generates those rare, perfect epiphanies, not the other way around. Inspiration doesn't just strike. We have to build our own lightning rods and generate our own weather by doing the hard work first, doggedly. When great ideas come, they're born of immersion and discipline. You know, it's funny, people are always surprised when I tell them I teach creative writing. Oh, writing's not anything you can learn, is it? They say, either you have talent or you don't. But writing is a craft with techniques to master, just like painting or dance. Mostly, writing is rewriting, cutting, revising, reworking. That first draft is always just the beginning. When you pick up a book, do you know what you're really holding? Thousands and thousands of decisions. Should I tell the story from the character's point of view or third person? Present tense or past tense? How should I structure the plot? Say I have a character, Leonard, who's moving from New York to Zurich. Do I begin with the plane taking off and lifting up poetically? Or do I begin in Manhattan and Leonard is looking for his passport in his apartment and he comes across some damning evidence in the kitchen drawer that his wife is having an affair? Or do I simply start, that spring, Leonard fled to Zurich? When I'm writing and my husband comes home at the end of the day and asks, what do you want for dinner, ravioli or pizza? I have a total meltdown. I don't know, don't ask me to decide anything else. Ravioli or pizza, what's better for the plot? Now, to be fair, there are moments where something just clicks. And I feel like I'm channeling voices, and the scenes do just write themselves. But 80% of the time, this doesn't happen. And half the time when it does, okay, and sometimes like when it does, I do think, wow, you are a genius. You are revolutionizing literature. Until the next morning when I read what I've written. And then I think, oh my God, you're an idiot. This is garbage. The creative process is akin to manic depression. The irony is that if you work hard enough and you write well enough, you make it look easy. And so then people think that it is effortless. Oh yeah, you're a writer? Someone always says to me, yeah, you know, I was thinking of taking a month off and writing a book myself. But this idea of instant creativity is simply magical thinking. And we women know how dangerous magical thinking can be. After all, we're steeped in it. We are taught from a very early age, someday my prince will come. With the right makeover, we can make a boy fall in love with us immediately. If we just lean in, we can be Superwoman. Never mind the policies and the politics that have a profound influence on our lives. We're somehow encouraged to see our fates as dictated by higher ethereal forces instead. Why else are there numerology and astrology sections in so many women's magazines and not so much men's? And why do we consult these things more? And I have to say, I'm guilty of that. I love astrology. I took an astrology book to China with me. But the women's website iVillage did a study in 2009. It found that over 30% of women who check their daily horoscopes use them to make important financial decisions. Hey, are you Capricorn? Great time to spring for a boat or a handbag. We are encouraged to relinquish whatever agency we do have in this world and to think that things will just come to us if we wish hard enough or if we're lucky or if we follow a very specific feminine code of behavior. And so I feel it's imperative for me today to remind everybody here in this room how disempowering it is to think that creative success depends upon moments when ideas just come to us. There is no lightning bolt. Okay then, so what is there? Creativity, after all, does require momentum, some sustained driving force. So let's try something. I'd like you all to close your eyes for a moment and recall something that enraged you, embarrassed you, insulted you. It can be something big, the Taliban destroying a girls' school, or something personal, a colleague being dismissive to you at a meeting. Now open your eyes. How do you feel? Your pulse will be slightly faster. Your heart is pounding a little harder. You'll also find you feel more fired up than if I had asked you to recall something pleasant. There is enormous energy to be harnessed from the negative. Anger, fear, shame, those things that we spend so much time trying to avoid actually provide incredible creative fuel. The Nobel laureate Toni Morrison once said, "I get angry, then go on and work." This sounds counterintuitive, but research bears it out. Studies show that anger helps people to take action, make more rational decisions, and better distinguish between strong and weak lines of thinking. 3 European researchers did a study last year on the effects of negativity on creativity. And what they found was surprising. People who begin their day with some negative experience, an antagonist, or even just upsetting thoughts, proved to be, if they went on and took positive action, they proved to be far more creative than people who simply began their day in a neutral or upbeat state. Now, none of my own books have been described as angry. They're usually described as lyrical and funny. But I have to tell you, what first motivated me to sit down and write them wasn't some divine muse. It was outrage. My moment of inspiration is not best described by voila, but by, "Oh, you have got to be kidding me." My first book I didn't expect to write. It was in response to a best-selling dating guide that urged women to trick men into marrying them. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," I said. "Why isn't there a guide to catching a life, not trapping a husband?" And so I wrote Kiss My Tiara, How to Rule the World as a Smart-Mouthed Goddess. My second book, Hypocrite in a Pouffy White Dress, was born of frustration. How come the only funny coming-of-age stories by women seem to be about being single and going shopping? My new novel, while male writers I was reading were creating these incredibly delicious, controversial, perverse anti-heroes, I was reading Gary Steingart's Absurdistan, Platform by Michelle Houellebecq. Women authors I knew were being pressured to write likable female characters who would appeal to women's book clubs. But we women are as morally complicated and difficult and flawed as men. To write about ourselves as if we're always just good in the end is to perpetuate an enormous lie. And so I created Lillian Dunkel, the main character in my novel, The Ice Cream Queen of Orchard Street. She's a drunk kleptomaniac ice cream lady. And you root for her even though she behaves despicably. And guess what? Women's book clubs love discussing her. But perhaps more than anything else was my book, Undress Me in the Temple of Heaven. This was born mostly out of pain and outrage. This is the memoir I finally wrote about that disastrous trip to China. For years, frankly, I couldn't touch that story. My ignorance, the way I'd behaved, it was simply too embarrassing. I thought, well, maybe I can disguise it one day as a novel. But then in 2003, I heard the Bush administration say that the American invasion of Iraq would be a cakewalk. "You have got to be kidding me," I said to my husband. "That sounds like me at age 21, planning my trip to China." And then a number of best-selling memoirs came out in which women described how, to get over their divorce, they traveled to Italy to eat a lot of pasta or refurbish a villa. Americans seem to think that other countries existed mostly for our own enrichment, and that we could just show up with very little understanding of the culture and prevail. Suddenly, it seemed imperative to me to write about travel as an act of surrender, not conquest, and to be honest about how scared and callow I'd been. And so I began Undress Me in the Temple of Heaven. This is not a story of heroism at all. And yet, an odd thing happened when I started to write it. I found that by facing the full, messy, naked truth, I developed far more compassion as a writer. I suddenly saw my helplessness and the bravery of the people around me and the danger of the situation with far more clarity and wisdom. By letting it marinate for 20 years and tapping into my greatest shame, I wrote a far better book than anything I had dreamed of when I was 21. My worst self gave rise to my best art. Why do we write? Why do we tell stories? To entertain, to enlighten, yeah, but ultimately, I think it's to comfort each other, to connect across the void, across our own frailties, to say to each other, you are not alone in your pain, in your yearning, in your hopes, in your anxieties. I see you. We're in this together. It's our struggles and our vulnerabilities that make us most compelling. Nobody wants to read a book about the virtuous. We can't relate. Writer Frank McCourt used to say, run a Geiger counter over your life. Where it goes off, that's where your stories are. There is no lightning bolt. But by tapping into the things that upset us most, we can have tremendous power and material. So many times we're told, and particularly women, don't get angry. Smile. Certainly, don't reveal your ugliness, your imperfection, your aggression. But these are the very engines of creativity. These are the things that endow us with the tools to transcend our suffering for a moment, to expand our empathy, to create great art, or figure out piece by piece the vast architecture and mysteries of the universe. It seems to me that so many people nowadays, we live like writers. We're alone and immobilized before screens, just expecting that everything will come to us quickly. But to do our best work, we need to smash the myth of divine inspiration and instant creativity. Don't wait for a lightning bolt. Start, persist, and dig deep within yourself for what is most radioactive, frightened, morally ambiguous, damaged, mean-spirited, vulnerable, angry, everything you're not supposed to celebrate at a TED Talk. This negative dross is the motherlode of art and energy and imagination. It's where our stories are, our passions are, our gifts. It's the source of our full humanity, our glorious potential, our momentum.